Welcome to Sollu Kaburz podcast. We could not help ourselves but talk about Indian journalism, right? Because the new highs that Indian journalism is going through right now is worthy enough of discussion for hours and hours. And I have a journalist on my podcast, first time on the podcast, Mr. Shoaib
Okay.
Daniyal. He writes for Scroll, Wire. What else do you write, sir?
I actually only write for Scroll. You'll get me in trouble.
Why are you writing for this anti-national traitors, sir? Why? Like, come on. I mean, write for people who are actually doing something good for the country, right? Like Op India or Swaraj Mag or something like that. Why this?
I think I am a true nationalist, and what I write and what I think and what I say, I really think does benefit India. So I can't speak for anyone else, but I think me and my publication, we truly have our societies and countries' interests at heart. So, uh, mood question like.
Is it fair to ask you to speak on behalf of many journalists? When I ask you this question, have you developed a thick skin?
Hmm. That's a good question. I don't know whether I can speak on behalf of all journalists
But many.
because, like every industry, we're a very, very diverse industry. Our country is very diverse.
Mm,
A journalist in, say, Madurai has a very different experience from one in Mumbai.
mm.
Not to speak of different journalists within Mumbai having very different experiences. But yeah, speaking for myself, yeah, you need to, I think, develop a thick skin, and it's not only with journalism. Basically, journalism is a public-facing profession,
Hmm.
right? Your work is evaluated, it's read by, it's discussed, debated by the public. It's not it's just the nature of the profession. Like for example, if say you're a coder, your work will rarely be discussed in public. You might still face a very high pressure job,
Mm.
but it will be within your own team or your own company, or at max your own industry. That's how far you go. But journalism, by its very nature, that's because that's what we do. So it's public facing. So I think we do. It's some amount of public criticism and debate and discussion. Even harsh criticism is part of your job role. So I think you should have a bit of a thick skin. You shouldn't turn into. You shouldn't be impervious to hurt, because if someone says some mean things to you, obviously everybody's human. But yeah, your threshold should be a bit high, because if you're just constantly getting hurt all the time, you won't be able to file anymore. So
And did that skin grow an inch thicker after 2014 and a couple of inches thicker ever since you started writing for Scroll?
so yeah, so like what I said the last time, about journalism being a public facing profession, that's true.
Mm.
But on the other hand, everything can be misused to some extent. So what we're seeing, and it's not only in India, it's there in many other places. It's there in Turkey, it's there in the United States
Yeah.
now. It's there in pretty much every country. There is a lot of organized trolling and abuse that happens.
Mm.
Because just to take one example, for example, Twitter in India. In India, it's actually very easy to uh, troll someone in an organized way, right? I'm not saying that. There is
Uh-huh.
obviously, you have your organic trends that come up, and you can have, you can have many like news events and this and that you organic trends that come up. But as we've seen, as people have pointed out, for example, the stellar work that Alt News has done.
Mm.
Political parties very often troll in a very organized and targeted manner. So that we have seen a spike since that, I would say, for the past 5 or 6 years.
Mm.
And this is like, I would say it's a slightly unfortunate trend, because it really it hits at the freedom of the press,
Mm.
because this is the trolling that we are getting here, because a reader is well within his or her right to criticize a journalist's work. It's what keeps us on our toes. Because this is something that every time I'm filing, and maybe every time anybody is filing, because it's a public facing profession, we have that check, so we're not supposed to go wrong. And if we go wrong, we're supposed to have a public mea culpa. We're
Mm.
supposed to, sort of own up in public. But this, if it's weaponized and is used in an organized way by organized interest groups who don't actually, whose interests are not to basically fact check you so much as to hobble you and stymie your journalism, that is where it gets difficult. And we've seen this, again, it's part of India, and we should talk about India, but it's also all throughout the world where there's a lot
Mm.
of targeted, trolling. The problem with the word trolling is, trolling is it has such a vast, the word has such a
Mm.
vast repertoire, because some trolling that could be just harmless trolling, right? Like,
Right.
I could get trolled for, I don't know, liking jalebi or something, it could
Mm.
be something, it could be a joke.
Mm.
But on the other hand, say if you're getting trolled very viciously on, say, on something, on your gender, on racial characteristics, on your ideology, on your opinions, uh, that's dangerous, So I would almost call that harassment rather than trolling.
Is that why politicians run behind media houses like never before to get a hold of them? Is it worth all the effort that politicians put to control the media? Is it worth it?
Well, let me answer this the other way.
Hmm.
That see, the media is an extremely important part of our world, right?
Hmm.
So, just sort of, just there's a political scientist called Benedict Anderson,
Hmm.
and he had basically sort of created, just to give you an example of how important media can be. So, I'm just sort of putting in his theory, where he basically has this theory where he says that all nationalisms are imagined, and the way they are imagined is through print media. He says
Hmm.
that nationalisms came up at the same time that newspapers came up.
Hmm.
So this allowed people through, and India is an exception, but most nationalisms in the world are linguistic nationalisms, usually one language nationalisms. You could be a Frenchman, you could be,
German.
German, you could be Sinhala, so on and so forth. So usually they are one language nationalisms. So he sort of argued that using print media, people sort of imagine themselves to be part of this imaginary community. Because usually a community is someone that you and I see, right? Like, for example, my community at home in Calcutta is my neighborhood. I meet those people every day.
Yeah.
I could love them, I could fight with them, I could be friends with them, whatever, whatever
Hmm.
human relationships I have with them. But if you think about a country is a sort of an imagined community, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, if say there is a bus crash in say in say Manali, right?
Hmm.
I've never been to Manali, right? But I'm supposed to care for that bus crash in Manali. It'll come in the newspaper the next day,
Yeah.
and so on. So that's how newspapers, for example, that's Benedict Anderson's thesis, and I find it quite smart.
Hmm.
Is like that's how they create this concept of us belonging to India. So if you look at the Indian newspaper, for example, if I'm in Calcutta, they will
Hmm.
not print news from Bangladesh,
Oh,
or
yeah.
they will only print very little news from Bangladesh.
Yeah.
But there will be a lot of news printed from Uttaranchal, so on and so forth. And every country does this. I'm just giving an example. Like Bangladesh will print news from Bangladesh. It won't print news from West Bengal. So that's how they create. So that's Benedict Anderson's view of how nations are created in the mind
Hmm.
by using print media. So clearly, media in the modern world is foundationally important. It's how we interact with our reality, how we build our
Our
reality,
window.
our window through the world, right? That's how we are. We sort of model ourselves. And this is a big example, but I could even take say smaller examples like culture and media and so on. For example, if you look at Bollywood from today
Hmm.
versus 20 years back, right? 20 years back, Bollywood was it was a different industry. You had these
Yeah.
film songs, and it had its own idiom. And then maybe one of the reasons why it changed was, people just suddenly got exposed to so much Western media, right? And for better or for worse, they thought we should make movies which are more like Hollywood.
Mm.
And so we sort of moved towards that. Rap, for example, has become so popular nowadays.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is because it's so easy now to listen to rap, right?
Mm.
If I had to listen to Western music in, say, 1950, I mean, there's this example I remember where I'm not going to name the music director, but a music director around 30 or 40 years back used to fly to the West to listen to Western music and then copy it. Now you
Wow.
don't have to do that anymore, right? Because
Right.
it's very easy to get Western music. It's very
Yeah.
easy for Westerners to get Eastern music. So our whole mindset is changed by the media in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very important. So clearly, if anybody is in power, and if anybody wants to wield power, he or she should have a good, who should have good control of the media. Like, this is almost a stereotype that when there's a coup, the first thing the new dictator does is get control of the radio station, right?
Hmm.
Like, that's what seals the coup.
Right.
That shows that he has control. If he doesn't get control of the radio station, and I guess it's the same today, except I guess today you've to seize control of Twitter or something.
Mm.
I don't know, right? Basically, you are only a dictator if you can project that you are a dictator
Yeah.
to the rest of the country. Otherwise, what's the point? You just capture a building, right? So media is very important. So in a way, every country would want to, every powerful person would want to capture the media, and it's up to the country as well as the media people in it to try and stymie that, because at the end of the day, the job of the media is not to get captured by powerful interests, or at least the job of journalism, which is a subset of the media, because otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise, we just in advertising.
But is it too much to expect that in today's world? I mean, internationally, if you see, ultimately, most news channels belong to a corporation, and a corporation has only one motive, right? So it's like for the profit, with the profit, by the profit. And how can you expect in and even in a socialist society, right? Ultimately,
Hmm.
it is under state's control. So
Mhm.
how can you possibly hope any unbiased, is it too much to hope? Is it hoping against hope? If we can expect some sort of unbiased media in today's world, because ultimately it's the corporation.
So see, I think when we talk about the media, we shouldn't. So what when we say media is unbiased, what does it mean? It does not mean that everybody suddenly becomes unbiased. I have my own biases. I'm sure you do. It's part of, I'll have to be a computer if I don't have my own political leanings,
Mhm.
my own biases, and so on. It's part of, it's a very core part of me being a sane human being, right?
Yeah.
So everybody, I think, has biases. If human beings have biases, their organizations will have biases. Some of those biases, like you correctly pointed out, will lean towards financial biases. Some of those biases might be ideological biases. So those biases exist. But the thing is, if you, in theory, like, obviously there's a bit of a slip between the cup and the lip between always between theory and practice. But in theory, your system should be vibrant enough for consumers to be able to access varied forms of media, right? So,
Hmm.
for example, just to have a theoretical financial example, let's say, there's an A and a B. Now, if A is very biased towards, say, party X, because of financial reasons, not because of any egalitarian reasons, any ideological reasons, and B is biased towards party Y, again for financial reasons, and these are models that sometimes you see in some Indian states, especially in the south, of
Yeah.
media houses being, with
Mm.
opposite parties, oppositional parties. If in theory, if they both have approximately equal amounts of power, I would call that a free media market, because it
Hmm.
gives the consumer a choice to get news from whichever source he wants. Hopefully, A will take out dirt for Y, and B will take out dirt for X, right? And that should work. So even with things like ideological biases, even with financial, conflicts of interest, if your media market is vibrant enough, if it's healthy enough, it should still do its job, as we've seen, other markets do. The issue is sometimes, say, if one side becomes extremely powerful, right, and it drowns out the other side, that's when you have a real problem on your hands. And that's not easy to self correct, because there are, like, there's the in a free market, the one thing, the regulator is usually the man in charge, which is the man in power. And if he himself does not want things to be fair, so then you're stuck in a loop, right? Nobody's going to break you out of that loop. So that is a problem in many places throughout. Like, I mean, it's all through. Like, to some extent, India is seeing that problem, where there is a lopsided power arrangement right now at the center. So that is one issue, and it's a common issue. For example, if you look at, say, what's an example? If you look at, say Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh is not a Chinese-style one-party state in theory, but it is practically in practice, right? So again, in theory, you could start a paper and do anything, but you will face severe repercussion from the government if you go past a certain line. And while I would say things are still not as bad as they are in Bangladesh right now, in India, there is somewhat of that model developing, where in theory you could open, you could do many things. But in India, and these are all structures that sort of in a way predate the current administration, but the government has so much control over so many aspects of industry, including media, that there are many ways in which indirect ways of control could be put in. That's a problem that we need to fix. So yeah, I wouldn't say that, if you have a corporation, if you have a if you have corporate vested interest, I mean, you don't have to be a saint to be a journalist, right? Journalists could be terrible people, and like, media owners could be bad people. Like, I mean, that's, I mean, everybody like everyone else, so it's not that, journalists are just incredible people and they're doing incredible work, but hopefully we should be in an environment where if, say, I'm leaning towards A, there should be other people who lean towards B, and so then we exist in a sort of equilibrium. And it's when that equilibrium gets broken, that's when we should be worried.
I mean, in an example, there should be a place for scroll and there should be a place for Samna too. If Samna is in power, it should not eliminate scroll. If scroll is in power, it should not eliminate Samna, no matter how ideologically opposite you are, in theory.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that should be the model that should be followed, and we should sort of aim for that, sort of dynamic equilibrium of a sort of moving past equilibrium. I think that's what we should try for. But unfortunately, that's a very theoretical thing, and very often governments move into try and sort of bend things their way.
Are we beyond the point of no return in hoping that we will have Doordarshan like news days? I mean, is that a fair thing to say? I mean, the days were when news was just read, it was not fed, right? Are we at the point of no return?
So I mean, why do we think Doordarshan was great? Because people were well spoken.
Okay.
Doordarshan was a government news channel.
Yeah, yeah. So I believe the point I'm trying to make here is: are we beyond a point of no return where we can expect news channel to just read news?
I wouldn't use the phrase "point of no return" because that seems like we've fallen into a lava pit. But I think we're never going to go back to Doordarshan. Now, whether you think that's good or bad, that's up to you, because Doordarshan was a different time. It was a central government run organization. Remember, for example, you could not run private news if you wanted.
Hmm.
So Doordarshan, I mean,
Yeah, I get your point.
yeah,
It has been used
yeah,
by various
it's
administrations.
been used
I
by
get it.
various administrations, right?
My
So,
I was more pointing towards the simpler times in a
so the
sense.
thing is, like our whole news, model has moved
Hmm.
where since, like, just to give you an example, right? Uh, say 30 years back, the news consumer, the average sort of English educated, which means quite elite in India,
Hmm.
English educated news consumer in India would maybe consume, say, half an hour or an hour of news every day, right?
Hmm.
That model has changed now. Now you're surrounded, man. You just to give you my personal example, I mean, I think it captures a mood. I was in college. I went to engineering college from 2004 to 2008.
Hmm.
Right. This was at a time when there was Orkut. There was no Facebook.
Right.
There was no Twitter, of course.
Yep.
So with my friends, I rarely spoke politics because there was no politics to speak. Right. I didn't know what the political opinion of my friends was, right? I mean,
Same.
one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
So, but now I think that's impossible. So because the whole world has changed so much that I know what all of my friends think about, the current union government, positive or negative. If I'm living in Calcutta, what they think about the state government, so on and so forth. So it's an intensely frenetic sort of news environment. So in a way, if you're a news organization and say you start reading DD style news, people won't watch you,
Hmm.
right? So they'll be like, this is not what I want something which is more suited to how I'm living the rest of my life. That look at my Facebook feed, look at my Twitter feed, look at my WhatsApp. So because of this saturation of media that has happened, which is largely social media driven,
Hmm.
our whole media environment has changed. You must remember, for example, when a TV channel now they have to compete with Twitter in some ways, right?
Hmm.
So, for example, if I very often need to quickly catch up with the news, I head to Twitter. Which is not something I would have done maybe 5 years back.
Right.
Maybe 5 years back, I would have switched on the TV.
Right.
So the whole idiom has changed, and we must look for a better world within that idiom, because I don't think we can ever have a situation where somebody just reads out five, sort of the top news. So that won't satisfy people anymore. We become such a, it's called, I don't know, Americans call it doom scrolling.
Hmm.
We love to consume news now in a way
Hmm.
that we did not. I think, for example, like college kids today have a very different environment than what I went through. Like,
Right.
because it's all around, right? Everybody knows their political opinion. I mean, earlier you simply didn't have a political opinion
I mean,
sometimes, right?
in our classrooms, our arguments were about boys versus girls, that silly
Yeah,
stuff,
right.
right?
Exactly. So exactly. So that
Which was
we
which was
we
which was not something that I'm endorsing, but you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, that was what it is. You were
Yeah,
19. We had
silly.
used to play computer games. You had
You
DC
used to
Structure,
argue
play
about who
movies.
your favorite hero was. That was the
Who
worst
your favorite
argument.
hero was, right? So in a way that we have changed. So
Hmm.
in a way that media environment. Uh, there is a guy called Michael McCullen.
Hmm.
I hope I'm pronouncing his name well. He has a very interesting thesis called "The Medium is the Message,"
Hmm.
uh, and it's a fascinating thesis which says that what we say is often dependent on the medium that we're using, right?
Hmm.
And for example, he gives this example of, I mean, he wrote his book around, I guess, 3 decades back, but it's still a very relevant thesis. He said with the invention of cable news, I mean, earlier people would have local news, they would have a local, from the 60s to the 80s, they would have a local news station, and it would be limited by geography, right? It would take time for news to come. Like, for example, my editor always tells us that you only came to know that the Babri Masjid had been demolished in Bombay, I think, a day later.
Mm-hmm.
And that is unthinkable today, right?
Yes.
Today, for example, if an event of that magnitude had happened, you would come to know within minutes. But that time, physically, news had to travel,
Mm.
right? Somebody had to, run to the next saying, hey, well, something, this has happened. So so it'll go. The government could control. Anyway, so getting back to Michael McCullen, he has the thing. He said that with the invention of cable news, now you can transmit news from any place of the planet to any other place in literally the time it takes you to talk in a room,
Yes.
right? So he's saying that this in itself will create news,
Mm.
right? Because you need to fill up now. You need to fill up now. You have that tech at your disposal.
Yes.
So that same guy sitting in wherever New York, earlier he would only watch news of, say, New York or the United States. But today that guy, for example, the first TV war was the Iraq war.
Yes.
Now, wars have happened earlier, but this time the war was beamed as part of cable TV,
Mm.
the 91 Iraq war, the Saddam Hussein war. So basically, because our mediums have changed, the way we talk, what we say has also changed, right? So medium is the message kind of thing. So Doordarshan existed, the content of Doordarshan existed at a time when the medium was very different. You had 1 hour of news every day. You said what you had to say. You went back to your normal work. But now everything has changed. Now our mediums are so different that they force us to almost say have political opinions,
Mm.
right? Like we are now creating content to fill a new medium, say, which is Facebook,
Right.
right? So in a way, rather than Facebook acting like a medium, which it is a medium, but because there is a new medium, Shoaib is also thinking of new things to say which he would never have said,
Mm.
right? Maybe I had like one political thought a week earlier, but now if I'm seeing everybody debating politics, I'm like, I must say something. So I go out and type, like I find it so weird that I mean, maybe I do it too. So I'm part of that sphere.
Mm.
I see people now, individuals give out statements condemning things
Mm.
in a way that governments would earlier. People will come and say, I
Right.
condemn this.
Yep.
It's almost like my personal statement. And I doubt, like say anybody 30 years back was going around, delivering statements, because there was no way to deliver it. Where would you deliver it?
Yes.
Right? So there was only people who wrote in newspapers had a space to deliver a signed statement. Otherwise, say, you have a Mr. Kumar living in Kanpur.
Mm.
Where would he would put the statement on his house? Like, where would he put that statement? But today we all have ways to publish ourselves.
Yes.
So now there's that pressure is there that, something has happened. I condemn this. I condemn this gruesome incident here. I
Mm.
condemn that. So in a way, we will never go back to Doordarshan for good or for bad, depending on you, because our whole world has changed.
Right.
We will never go back to somebody reading out the news bulletin in beautiful English or Hindi, because it's different right now.
Right. Is it steering the conversation to India? Is it fair to say that we have reached a point where journalists are either scared or sold?
No, I don't think there's such a stark difference. There's a stark divide.
Mm-hmm.
There is a pressure on journalists, but you must remember, like, journalism is a huge field.
Mm.
All right, it's a dynamic sort of field. So we always trying to second guess what the consumer is sort of thinking. So there is. I'm not saying there is no government pressure, and there is no trolling pressure and so on, but it's still a very dynamic field. So I really don't think there are you don't have that sort of binary exists. in some ways, we are also uh, we are also we look at the easy data points, which is sometimes we look at, say, a few large channels,
Mm.
quote unquote national channels in Hindi and English, right? But that, remember, we are a country of 1.3 billion people,
Mm.
large number of people. Let's assume, I don't know the numbers, but I mean, I'm just making I'm just doing a thought
Hypothetical,
experiment,
right?
hypothetical. Let's assume 50% of them consume TV news media,
Mm.
right? As a hypothetical. So that's something like 650 million people.
Mm.
Right? That itself is, I don't know, something like double the population in the United States.
Yeah.
So how I don't think a very large number of them are getting covered by these few problematic large media outlets.
Hmm.
But I think there are many others that would not be uh, captured by that same framework. For example, I am aware of Bengali news media. Bengali news media has its own dynamic, which is different from, I'm not saying it's like necessarily much better or much worse, but it has its own dynamic, which is sort of specific in many ways to Calcutta and West Bengal,
Mm.
and you cannot really describe it with the sort of the quote unquote national media.
Mm.
This is a large English and Hindi news channels, mostly out of Noida. Uh, so it's because we're so large in many ways. India's largeness, that's just in this sheer size,
Yes.
sometimes is an automatic check against against this sort of thing. Like, just to go back to an earlier thing, when you're talking about Bangladesh,
Mm.
Bangladesh is like basically a very large Indian state, you
Yes.
know, practically. So if someone wants to clamp down on the media, it's easier to do because you have
Mm.
to maybe clamp down on 10 newspapers, 4 channels,
Mm.
so on, right? But in India, it's very, very difficult. So in India, for example, very often, I mean, while there is some channels face pressure from the central government,
Mm.
many of the times local regional channels face pressure from the state government.
Mm.
To sort of, so there are so many centers of power, and
Right.
like we discussed, centers of power is a good thing. Many centers of power is a good thing because it's a natural, it could lead to a
Check.
natural equilibrium. It's
Right.
very difficult for one person to control,
Mm.
so that's our advantage. So I don't think there is any incredible danger like that. In fact, there are, you know uh, because of this social media has many negatives and many positives, like
Yes.
all new disruptive tech has, right? So I mean, you could go back 600 years, and people, I mean, there are accounts of people saying that you shouldn't let people read books. It's
Mm.
very dangerous. It sort of it distracts
Yeah, it
people
happened.
from,
It
say,
happened with telephone,
happened with
radio,
telephone.
radio. So the telephone generation blame the radio people blame the
Yeah,
television people. Now the television
television,
boomer folks are blaming the social media people, and we are
social
blaming the
media,
TikTok.
TikTok. Yeah, exactly. So it happens with everything, and there are negatives and there are positives. We've discussed some of the negatives,
Mm.
but there are also a lot of positives. For example, to give you an example, in a
They,
state like Mizoram,
mm.
there are a lot of. Sorry, I'll just complete this.
Right.
There are a lot of there's a lot of journalism being done on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. It's a small state. They don't have maybe the numbers to support
Mm.
many newspapers, and here's an easy publishing tool, so they're using it.
Mm.
So I mean,
Arab
yeah.
Spring was one of the earliest social media powered movements, if we can call it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a tool, right? Ultimately, I mean, you can't blame the tool. You have to blame the people who are
Uh,
using or misusing the tool. Blame the misusers, obviously.
I mean, depends. You can blame the tool sometimes.
Hmm.
Like for
Yeah, when the tool
example,
when the tool has its
yeah,
own mind, like Facebook, like
Facebook, right?
Zuckerberg. Yeah.
Yeah. So here, for example, tool. I mean, while we sort of, it's not a hammer, right? Like for example,
Mm.
exactly like Zuckerberg,
Exactly.
Facebook is its own thing. So we
Yes.
must sort of be smart about it.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, social media is never going to go away,
Yeah.
right? So we must, we can't, as much as we would, some people would like it, it was not going to go away, So it's like, like, for example, when I was really small, we didn't have a telephone at home. Uh, but once we got that telephone, I mean, and we lived just fine with the telephone, right? We
Right.
we lived our lives. But I think once we got a landline telephone at home, it's impossible to think of life
Yes.
without a landline telephone,
Same with
right?
mobile. Yeah.
Same with mobile, and then happened mobile, now it's happening. So we get used to these things, and that's how we sort of develop. So it's never going to go back, and it might lead to some positives, some negatives.
But how can we trust uh, any platform whose only job, I mean, I'm bringing you back to the same question of for profit driven platforms, right? Because their whole agenda is to make your eyeballs glued to their paper or their channel or their platform, right? How can we be self aware in such environment that we mostly see today?
So for me, actually, the more than the danger of for profit, like
Huh.
example, to give you an example,
See,
uh,
I'm sorry to
uh,
interrupt. So, for example,
yeah.
if Facebook algorithm, for example, right, it will suggest you. It will not only Facebook, any platform. It suggests
Mm,
what you search for, right? So, if there is a, for example, if there is a Nazi sympathizer, it is in Facebook's or any platform's best interest to throw him more Nazi sympathizing content, right? That's how it makes profit, right? So how can we come out of this cycle? What precautions we as netizens, as we call ourselves today,
okay.
should really be aware of?
So this is like, I don't know, like, I don't know the answer to that. These are like very big questions.
Mm,
But like, for example, just to play devil's advocate, and
mm,
uh, let's say uh, let's say that there was an Arab Spring somewhere,
mm,
and the dictator controlled the social media network.
mm,
So if you're faulting Facebook with, say, throwing some throwing some ideology towards a guy who's already inclined towards it,
mm,
what if the dictator said that, oh, you can't say search for how to organize during a protest,
mm,
right? And he sort of blanked it out.
mm,
So I'm saying that any sort of control could be misused one way or the other. It depends on, because we think, if into your example machine you plug in a bad example, which is Nazism, you might think that's a bad example. But say if you plug in, I don't know, feminism, that would
mm,
be a good example for you. So if someone's searching for feminism and Facebook throws in more feminism,
mm.
so he'll become a better person, right? So
Right.
the same algorithm has, on one hand, led to what is, in my opinion, a bad result, and the other hand is led to what is, in my opinion, a good result.
Right.
So this is, so for me, really, that, for example, the danger with Facebook, it really is its monopolistic power.
Yes.
uh, Facebook is, because I think everybody who starts any social media network will have these algorithms. They're not going to make a blank slate, right? Because
Mm,
at the end of the day, like you said, it's a for-profit organization. They're doing it for their own interest, but and that is a problem.
mm,
But for me, really, the bigger problem is just how much singular power Facebook has. Like, for example,
mm,
Facebook now has, for example, recently we saw with Trump, right? Now, of course, we might dislike what Trump is saying in those examples, but it also sets a very interesting precedent that a media company could censor the US president.
right.
What does that say about how powerful that media company is?
Mm,
Whether we like that precedent or not is immaterial to this example, but the fact that they thought that they can decide what is right and what is wrong on that, that's an interesting precedent, because maybe there could be a situation 10 years down the line
mm.
where we might think the president is say something right, and the
Yeah.
media company would censor him. So it's a the trick to that is that, the trick to that, in my opinion, is that, what social media unfortunately has become, what people would call earlier in the internet a walled garden, where people
Mm,
would have different mini internets.
Yeah.
That has, it sort
Echo
of
chamber.
goes an echo chamber, right? That in a way goes against the sort of underlying logic of the internet.
Right.
The underlying logic of the internet with HTTP and email and so on and so forth was that there should be cross-platform, interoperability. So we should, if I want to email you from Yahoo and you're on Hotmail, we should be able to talk. If you have a website, doesn't matter where you built it, I should be able to access it.
Mm.
But Facebook is trying its best to dismantle that, and that's a dangerous sort of thing because that's their world. Facebook is an internet in and of itself. It's a privately owned internet,
Yes.
right? So the amount of power that they have, uh, uh, sort of, we've seen this in India also right now, right? Facebook, you have this great reporting by the Washington Post where there was actually credible sort of
Collusion. Yeah.
collusion with respect to Facebook. So this is an incredible. We're seeing this in India. So Facebook has now so much power that they can play at least some part in determining which way an Indian election would go. That's a dangerous thing, right? Like, because see, you could fix. There are many ways to steer elections. Let's say earlier I had a lot of power and I wanted to influence people's minds. I would actually have to do the legwork, go to people's houses, go to their villages, you know, even if I had to do terrible things, say I had to use force, I had to be a gunda, I would have to send many gundas out into many villages, stuff many ballot boxes. It's a logistical nightmare to do that. On the other hand, if I can just directly pay Facebook, right? It's what's called one window. It's an easy way to do corruption, right? An easy way to fix an election. That's bad, So people, I mean, I would say, it's everybody's. Maybe if I become a politician, I would want to influence elections because at the end of the day, why do people become politicians? Because they want to earn power, right?
Right.
That's their main goal. That's why that's what a politician should be.
Right.
We tell ourselves many things, but ultimately, if a politician is not driven to capture power, it's quite probable that he will not be a successful politician because it's a very, very, no matter what we might think of politician, politics is a back-breaking job. It's a highly demanding job. You've got to be an incredibly intelligent person, right? So that guy is putting in so much time and effort for clearly a reason. So we want to make as many barriers for this really intelligent person so that he does good for us if he becomes prime minister and he represents our country or our state or our whatever or an MP seat. But he doesn't also mess with us.
Right.
Democratically.
Yeah. Last question before I let you go. How to word our condemnation against Arnab's arrest? Okay. So here's the thing. We're not condemning because he's some legendary journalist. All right. See, ultimately, it's state wielding its power over a voice, right? Voice, regardless of which way the voice leans, right? But is there a way to I'm not a big fan of his whatever he does and whatever he stands for, but ultimately what has happened with Arnab has happened with thousands of journalists around the country who don't get the same limelight. So I don't you think it is like kind of fair somewhere in the corner of your mind to be concerned about that arrest, because ultimately what it is a journalist being used as a pawn.
Yeah, so the Arnab thing is something that I think probably many Indian journalists would have thought deeply about. And so there are I guess, I would say like a couple of points that I would like to make is, so the entire Arnab thing, obviously, it will be investigated criminally. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
So,
I mean, if it was a different government, that suicide note would have never come out. Like, let's be honest, right?
So if you see the thing there, for example, so there is alleged political collusion at 2 points in that case. One is when that case is closed in 2019, and the other is when that case is open in 2020. Right? One in which it could have helped him, the other it could have harmed him.
May I interrupt? I mean, this is in no way This is in no way supporting Arnab in any way, because he's actually been convicted, right? In a letter, right? So my point is not towards what he did. Was he right? Was he wrong? My point is towards state playing pawn with a journalist. That's I know. I hope you get what I mean, right?
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, so in this case, uh, the state interacts with his case both in 2019 and 2020
Mm,
in different ways. So
mm,
so we see this sort of very unfortunate sort of intersection between, which should never happen,
mm,
between a journalist and the state. So
right.
that's one. The second thing that we need to see Arnab as a part of a very long pattern of the Indian state either trying to co-opt or target journalists,
Mm,
right? So this is like this is a very, very unfortunate thing in India, that while we have done some things good in making our media environment, but on the other hand, very often we do, especially out, like for example, I'm in a way the wrong guy to talk about it, because see, I write in English,
mm,
I live in a metro town, so on and so forth. So I mean, people like me might face some issues. But say if I was working in, say, a conflict zone,
mm.
if I was, say, working in,
Syria.
in, oh, I mean, there are conflict zones within India.
Oh
So
yeah,
if
yeah, yeah.
we're working within India, right?
Mm,
If I'm a small guy writing for a small newspaper, if I'm writing in Hindi, and
mm,
so on and so forth. So I sometimes, that we don't get that limelight.
mm.
So it's very easy for local politicians, for state politicians, to snuff those voices out, and this has been happening for a very long time. And one of the things that we all should push for is the extremely correct and salutary things that the Supreme Court said about Honorable. We should really endeavor to make sure that these sort of freedoms are handed over to every journalist,
Yes.
right? Right now, as we speak, for example, there's a journalist called Gautam Naulakha in jail
Mm,
on some extremely unusual looking charges. So we must make sure that this sort of thing reaches to Mr. Naulakha. We must make sure that this sort of this sort of thinking reaches to Bastar, reaches Kashmir. Because it's if we use a principle and limit it to the most powerful person, right? If we use a good principle and limit it to the most powerful person, if we say that, I mean, feminism should be limited to industrialists, or minority rights should be limited to some extremely rich Muslim or Christian person, that is, it's good that we have that right, and it's good that he's benefiting, or he or she is benefiting from it. But if
mm.
you stop there, it's a betrayal of that principle, right? Because clearly, anybody who is a feminist should make sure that every woman in India, at least in some way or the other, should be able to benefit from this ideology, from this way of thinking.
Right.
If there are minority rights, every minority in India, whether he be an extremely elite person in Delhi, or whether he be some guy, some villager in Jharkhand. So we must make sure that this principle goes on. Otherwise, we could be accused of just comforting the already comfortable, and that's what
Yeah.
we need to avoid in the case of Ondo.
Right. Right. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a fascinating chat. Thank you very much for your insights. More power to you. Stay safe. And I repeat that with as much stress as I can for the reasons that you know. Uh, Good luck to you, sir. Good luck to journalism. Please let us know where we can find you on social media if you want us to find on social media.
Uh, I'm on Twitter with my handle is Shoaib Daniyal.
Perfect. Perfect. That's it from the Sollu Kaburz podcast. Ladies and gents, till we see you next time. Bye, everyone.